Go on.
Hello everyone. Karen and I will be talking to you about religion in the South, specifically the Colored Episcopal Methodist Church, which is presented in the book. So, I found this quote and I thought it was very fitting to introduce the religion.
Wow.
On Wednesday, I'm guessing it's of January, because it was written this way, so I'm just going to let you interpret that. So it says, this date, on that Wednesday of 1758, this date's registry from 1758 briefly writes about the history of the Black Church in America. This institution, which was the first source of land ownership for slaves in America, with the human character of Black people, is viewed as the reason and savior of oppressed African people in the United States. So it's from the African American Registry. So basically, I wanted to start off by saying this because the religion was very important for African Americans in the South for many reasons that we will explain. Yeah. So, history of the religion, how it all started. Members of the Free African Society discovered how far American Methodists, so all the white people in the South, how far they would go to enforce racial discrimination against the African Americans. So, the FAS realized how mistreated they were, and even in church, and it came to the point where they wanted to create their own section, their own church, their own...
S'excuse du dérangement dans les salles de classe. Les élèves qui participent au Nine Table sont attendus au foyer de l'école.
So they wanted to create their own religious place where they could get together and not be racially discriminated. So thus began the African Congregation. The separation was mainly caused by the disagreement of slavery, and that was the racism. At the time, it was the slavery, how the blacks were forced to be slaves, and this was all before the war, the American Civil War. So this is a map of the United States, of where the black parts are where there are over 25 churches per county. And then there were also some in California, but these were the main concentrations of the churches. And then plus to those, that's in 1850, plus to those, they were separated because of the racism. So now, to talk about the American Civil War that happened from 1861 to 1865. After the American Civil War, the AME, which is African Methodist Episcopal Church, spread remarkably. Now you think slavery just ended because of the war, it was abolished, right? Why would have the churches continued and become even more popular, I guess, or more established throughout the country? And that is because further racism never ended in America, especially in the South, because they just did, well, we all know why. So the Confederate States fought for the right of slavery, so the South, amongst other things, but it didn't. They didn't win the war. That's why slavery was abolished, but the racism never ended.
All right, so now we're just going to talk about the role of the church throughout history. So it was known for political, social, and military support. Military not as in fighting, but they would plan escapes for the slaves and help them out. As a church, obviously they were a congregation for they would give the people hope and obviously a refuge. The church's role was to obviously respond to its members' needs. They would respond to acts of lynching and when there was mobs and acts of terrorism. While they would pray inside the church, the whites would come and beat them because the whites thought it was against them that they were praying to God. But obviously we know throughout in the book it says that they would always talk about charity and how they were closer to God because they were not.
They suffered more on earth.
Yeah, they suffered and they weren't rich, so it's because there was a word that I forgot it. So they fought for the freedom of black slaves. They would always go and try to defend them. So usually their church meetings ritual would start with like devotional prayer, and then there would be singing, like the choir, and then the minister would give his sermon. So how the church would do this, like they started by touring the South, and they would try to convince the slaveholders to like release their slaves and to give freedom to the blacks and to like stop racism and the lynching and all the acts of terrorism. They would always say that the Bible acknowledged slavery, but because they're Christians, they have to like change it and make it like they improve the conditions. Also, as mentioned in the book, the cultivation of cotton gin enabled profitable cultivation in the South, and that increased the demand of slaves. So that's why even after the Civil War, this church still like spread, because there was still racism and they still enforced the slaves in the South to work for them because they were in demand because of the cultivation of cotton gin. So when that happened, the liberation stopped, and like they couldn't rebel anymore and escape. So it was obviously another hard time for the blacks in the South. The Northern Methodists opposed slavery, and some members became active in the abolitionist movement. So obviously they were obviously supporting this. The Church of the Northern Methodists would support the African Methodist Church to abolish slavery and racism, and then obviously the Southern Church accommodated it, and they used that to help them. And so throughout the book and throughout like the novel, how is the role of the church portrayed in it, and why? Like, why do you think Maya Angelou decided to talk about the church, and did it affect her in any way? I have answers if you guys want. Johan?
Well, she talks about how Mama is really religious and how she prays every day. So like how she grew up in this mentality of going to church, praying, and things like that.
All right, so I'm just gonna ask you guys a few questions to just jog your memory. So the first time the church is mentioned is in the prologue, and we know that in the prologue she pisses her pants and she hates that environment. So we see that although the church wants to help the black and all that stuff, she doesn't necessarily feel comfortable there, and she kind of hates it. Also, she has this idea of God that he's white, and it's like this constant racism that the church is trying to abolish, or like help, but it doesn't really affect her. So that's like the first time the church is mentioned, David?
Oh, the first time.
Like, it's the prologue. So. And then also the cotton gin. We discussed how she saw how the people were always sweating and that there were slaves, so she was a witness to this.
The racism and slavery.
Yeah, the unfairness. So obviously the church was supposed to help them, but I guess there's only so much they can do, but she still saw that there was racism and slavery. Any other times you guys remember the church was mentioned?
I remember when they mentioned God, they said that he didn't prefer any racial color. He said that
Prejudice?
he's not prejudiced.
Perfect. So during the retreat or the ritual, that was a bunch of churches that were regrouped together, and they would always, one of the quotes was like, they talked about charity, and that was like the weird thing that happened because the minister took people from other churches, and so that's also something that could have affected Maya's character, because she then believed that like blacks were obviously like, because they were poor, they had an eternal life with God, they were humble, and the whole charity act, all that was a part of her that she was always taught and that she experienced along the way. Chris?
Even if the church didn't play a big role, Mama did, and Mama's life was affected by the church. So even if she didn't like the church, the church played a huge role in her life because of Mama.
So can you tell me how?
How it's all the values and all the, like how she lived, how she, even her super ego when it comes in with when she gets raped, it's because of what Mama taught her, which is because of the church.
Okay.
And how she was raised.
Diego?
And also to add, like what you said, like, you know, like she would know about her routine, you know, get up 4 a.m., pray, And she would also, like in any event that they were unsure of and didn't know what to do or what to expect, they would always, look towards God, or like, random punishments that Maya thought were random, like for example saying, by the way, like, and she didn't expect that but like, being raised by mom and everything, she just, accepts it, and she doesn't quite understand why, but it's pretty, has a big impact in her life.
David?
I think that in the book, we can't really see the effect that the church has on Maya, like the whole book, because the book ends when she's pregnant and she has a baby and stuff. But if now the life of Maya happens after, and that she's now really devout, and that she always thinks because if you look at after what happened, she looks at God now and she understands what Mama means to her. So I think now, like in the book, we just saw her teenage life, her early child life, but I think the church really helped her character development after.
In the long run.
And then in the long run.
Johan?
And David just brought up a good point, is that by the end of her teen years, she doesn't
Yeah, she doesn't, the
go
church
to
is not
church, she
really
doesn't pray about anything, so it's more like her childhood, but after that.
So what we can conclude is that maybe the church didn't have a direct impact on Maya, but it was all obviously played a role in how she was raised and the people she was surrounded with. Like she went to the retreat, Mama was very religious. We can also say that the values that she was taught, like charity and not lying, was also through probably the church and the Bible that was taught through the church. But it also kind of contradicts because we know that she doesn't like the church, and for her it was just another environment she had to fit in because she was made fun of in the prologue and she pissed her pants and all that stuff. So you can tell that she doesn't think of the church as a main role, but it still did affect her indirectly.
Yeah, and as she grew distant of Mama, she was like,
She lost.
she didn't even notice that it was missing in her life. So we can see that it was never really relevant in her, lifestyle or whatever.
So it may not be an important theme in the book, but it definitely is an important aspect to remember about Maya because it's what formed her as a child and her morals and whatnot.
Yeah, so if you want to just emphasize on why the author would write about this, it's probably because in the long run, like David said, it affected her and it also affected her in her very young. You don't have to. So it's good or bad?
Terrible.
Should I save the PowerPoint?
Ja, to her
Yes.
desktop.
Fast.
Just